Hi, my name is Charles Cecil. I am the founder and the CEO of Revolution Software, and I'm the game director of the games that we've written. Most recently is Broken Sword, Shadow of the Templars Reforged, but we go back to Beneath the Steel Sky, In Cold Blood, and many, many other. And I've had the huge privilege of working in writing video games for 40 years. And it's just great to be here at GOG, a publisher that we've long worked with. And it's just finally, after all of these years, how great to be able to come to Warsaw, come visit you in Poland, and to actually be here. And thank you for the invitation. At Revolution, we and I are incredibly lucky that Broken Sword still resonates. The original game came out in 1996, and people come to our offices and take pictures underneath the sign that we have in York. And I meet people at conferences, and they talk about how the game has affected their lives. It's an extraordinary privilege. So we decided that our original game, Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars, which was released in 1996, how wonderful it would be to write the same game but enhanced in 4K, and also the opportunity to address little things that had irritated me for 30 years, inconsistencies, problems with continuity, but never changing anything for the sake of changing it, only changing things that we thought should be changed, redrawing all of the backgrounds from the original art, which meant that some things did change from the game, but the original art, the original layouts by the wonderful Owen Cahill, to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude, his was the canon. That was what the intention was. To go back over all of the animations, redraw them, add facial expressions. Our fantastic animators went back to the original character sheets because that was what the intention was. And they were able to then redraw the characters in much higher detail, add facial expressions. And what I promised people was that we weren't going to change the game for the sake of it. What we were going to do was we were going to write the same game, but just way, way better. The game, when we were working, well, when I was doing an interview with PlayStation last year, they said, PlayStation is 25 years old. You released Broken Sword 25 years ago. What's going to be happening in 25 years? And my answer was, I would be so privileged to think that this high-resolution, reforged version that has been reinvented for 2025 would actually still be resonating in 25 years' time. I guess time will tell. Our first game was called Year of the Temptress, and then Beneath the Steel Sky, and they were written for MS-DOS. And MS-DOS was the text-based system that Microsoft used to use before they invented Windows. And Windows, I believe Windows 95 supported MS-DOS, and then Windows 98 stopped. It was one of those, at which point the game could no longer be played. So from our perspective, it was dead. And it was dead because at retail, there were new games coming through, and there's no way that an older game could. And we were then approached by a group of adventure enthusiasts, mainly students, called ScumVM. And they invited us to give them the source code. They would rewrite the game, and they would effectively preserve the game itself for future generations. And we owe them a huge debt of gratitude because that allowed us to then republish the game. We did the same for Broken Sword because the Windows versions ran out. What's exciting now is that there are emulators that allow those original games to be played. Now, clearly, the original games, they're more authentic because they were the original experience, but they're inevitably lower resolution. So there's this sort of very, very healthy mix between the new games as they're reinvented and then the original games that can be played, and it's fantastic. One of the complications, of course, is the rights, and those are the rights between the publisher and the developer, because the publishers used to try and take all the rights and then they would hoard the games that they had no interest, but they would never release them, which was incredibly frustrating. At Revolution, we were very lucky in that or maybe very skillful, I don't know, one of the two, or a bit of both, in that we retained all of the rights to all of our games, which meant that we could continue to publish them ourselves. Of course, there are elements within that. The music, for example, was written by a very talented composer, Barrington Phelan, and he continues to license those rights to us. And it's great because we have formal agreements. If we didn't have those agreements, of course, it would be very complicated. And I think that almost certainly a lot of games fall down because they might have licensed music tracks, particularly songs, and they license it for a certain amount of time. And when those rights expire, they no longer have the rights to the game. But the key thing that you must remember, all of this happened because up until the digital revolution, the ability to have digital distribution, which came with Steam originally around about 2005, 2006, and then Apple 2007, was that before then games went into shops and there was a limited number of shelves, and once a game dropped out, effectively it was gone. And then the move, of course, to an infinite storefront meant that you could revive these old games, and it was fantastic for independent developers. So a lot of the deals were done during the time of retail when you knew that you had limited. I mean, to give you an example, and I'm really ashamed to say this, I remember throwing away some of the assets for Broken Sword because I was absolutely certain that we would never, ever need them again. Because under the retail model, we never would have done. It would have been impossible. And then we were able to reinvent the game, and then we were able to republish it. So since then, we've been looking through all of our archives to find as much as we can. And the one thing that we weren't able to find when we remastered or reforged Broken Sword was the original voice actors. And we looked so hard. We looked for the German, the French, the Italian, the Spanish, the English. We weren't able to find any of the original voices, which kind of breaks my heart, except that there is now very good software which actually enhances it. So it probably is pretty close to the quality that we would have originally had. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent. I hope that doesn't matter.
That's all right. That's perfect for us.
So we're in the position now where Evercade have done a cartridge with some of our original games, and Antstream are doing the same. And we're planning to publish an edition of our old games run under the Antstream envelope and emulators. And I find it absolutely wonderful that a younger generation is so excited by where video games came from and want to experience it. And I was actually talking to a very interesting guy who founded a magazine in the UK called Lost in Cult. What he was saying is that most of his readers are below the age of 35. And I find that fascinating because if you actually go back at their formative years, that is the age at which the big switch went from physical to digital. And I think it's wonderfully optimistic for the industry as a whole that a new generation are so passionate about the art form and the aesthetics of video games, and are so keen to make sure that these games are preserved. You might say that a slightly older generation, which were brought up on games from retail, have a very different attitude because that was go off to the pub, have a few drinks, come back, play with your friends. A new generation appears to be much more passionate about the artistic side, which is fantastic. It's a really, really nice change. So I better say in a whisper that GOG used to be called Good Old Games. And I know they've changed, and but there's in their DNA, in your DNA, there's still this kind of sense that there's a celebration of older games. And of course, many of our games, which come from the 90s, are very much fit into that category. So I see GOG as a fantastic ally. I think GOG's community and our community have a huge overlap. And that's why it's such a pleasure to come to GOG, because we've been working with you for, well, at least 10 years, really since the very, very early days. And the reforged version of the first Broken Sword, I mean, we're very, very proud of it. There is a nostalgic area. I mean, we hope that, and we're seeing that a lot of young people who never knew the original are being attracted. But nostalgia is a really, really important part as well. And so it's just wonderful that our game is resonating with GOG community, and it's lovely to be able to work with you on it. So I guess the purest form of preservation would be the physical copies. And isn't it wonderful to see all of these boxes? So many of them are games that I bought back in the day, and it's really lovely to see them on a shelf. But obviously, for people who want to experience the games, yes, of course they can get the CDs out, but it almost certainly won't work. So I think the ability to play these games on an emulator is really valuable, because people want to experience the games as they did. One of my favorite experiences, actually, I have to say, was playing some of my original games on the Sinclair ZX81, which was a computer from 1981 that kicked off the whole really home computer games in the UK. And it had 1K of memory. Now, I know that this is very cheap, but I'm going to do it anyway. My iPhone has 256 million times as much memory. But we wrote a chess program that ran in 1K. And how brilliant it was at an event recently, that somebody had a ZX81 and they had what was called a 16K RAM pack, but you put micro SD chips in and you could play any game. And that was joyful, because you played the game on the device, but obviously using the modern technology. And that felt like an absolutely fantastic use of the mixing of the original hardware with the ability, obviously, from modern hardware to make the whole experience so much easier. So for anybody who has a passion, don't do what I do, which is store stuff in the attic where it goes moldy, and then when the roof leaks, it all gets wet. I think what is fantastic is the opportunity to put things in airtight containers and be really proud of them, because it's such a thrill for somebody of my age to actually be given games that I wrote 30 years ago that are in pristine condition and asked to sign the cover. It's just, and I really admire the people who've actually had the foresight to really look after those boxes, because as time goes on, they're just going to become more and more special and more valuable. And it's just great, as I say, that people have, that's particularly a younger generation, have so much passion in wanting to preserve the past. So thank you for all your support. Thank you to our community, and a particularly thank you to people who are both Revolution community and GOG community, because I think there are lots of those. Thank you so much.